Welcome to Spotlight on Visiolux. Just a quick introduction. This is an opinion piece written by our writer Scribe and going to be narrated by me. So let's just go ahead and get into it. In 1946, an astonishing vision of the future was overwhelming everyone. Futurism, spacewalks, flying cars, and robot servants. But not all dreams are imagined equally, and some dreams come with hidden consequences. Imagine the following scene. It's World War II. A man is working in a propaganda house, the BBC. Clicking typewriters, rustled papers, and boisterous voices, George Orwell tolls away at another newsroom article. His job is to convince the Indians that their suffering really matters. His articles are news and commentary pieces. The subjects are simple. Things like, you are helping the greater good. Maintaining the war effort is the #1 priority. And we have to eliminate these... I'm not going to be able to say the word. He was right. The war ended in 1945, and the world celebrated with good reason. And progress marched on, but dreams of war, control, and oppression still haunted Orwell. So just what kind of world did George Orwell fear? And what did he get right? Now, our technology was still in the realm of fiction in the 1940s. However, in 1984, George Orwell imagined some new technology, with one specific invention standing out.
Even before setting pen to paper, the essential crime that contains all others in itself.
The telescreen.
Right. Let's see which one of us can touch his toes. Bend lower. You're not trying.
The telescreen was ever present, ever watching, and ever monitoring. And the screen broadcast state-approved news, propaganda, and daily events. It was a double-sided surveillance tool. It transmitted and received everything. The telescreen monitored everyone and was required in all party members' houses and public spaces. You wanted privacy? Forget about it. Now, I mean, parallels exist, right? Privacy today monitoring is digital. Surveillance and privacy invasions are more capitalistic and not really bureaucratic. Or are they? Because right now someone is building a digital profile on you. They're able to monitor your clothing choices, your shopping habits, your grocery list. They're even able to see what you listen to on Spotify. They are building a complete digital version of you. They're curious about what you're buying. They want to know where you've been and who you're hanging out with. And it's all because they want to sell you more stuff. I believe George Carlin had a bit on that.
Actually, it's just a little place for my stuff. You gotta have that. Gotta have a little place to put your stuff during the day, during the evening, whatever it is, don't you? Sure. Everybody's gotta have a little place for their stuff. That's all life is about. That's the meaning of life. Trying to find a place to keep your stuff.
They love collecting data to find and sell you more things that you may want. You might not even need those things, you may just want them. But they'll figure out how to sell them to you. Web tracking, digital footprints, cookies, it's everywhere. Your digital footprint is valuable. George Orwell never imagined capitalism like this. But are advertisers the only ones who monitor you? Somewhere out there, a man sits in peace. The air is quiet, the mood is calm. The frigid cold hits his face. He's in Russia. He wasn't always here, but he doesn't have any regrets. It was a chaotic road for Edward Snowden, because he knew what the government was doing was wrong. Back in May 2013, Edward Snowden released a massive leak of information and files that pertain to government-run surveillance programs.
When you're in positions of privileged access, like a systems administrator for these sort of intelligence community agencies, you're exposed to a lot more information on a broader scale than the average employee. And because of that, you see things. When you see everything, you see them on a more frequent basis. And you recognize that some of these things are actually abuses, until eventually you realize that these things need to be determined by the public, not by somebody who was simply hired by the government.
During this time, the United States government was illegally surveilling its citizens. And that's not all, because they weren't just doing it for them. Governments were working with other governments. The United States government was found to be collecting data from not only text messages and cell phone data, but also directly from tech giant servers, stuff like from Apple, Google, and Facebook. Now, after it all came out, Obama did pass some protections, but were they really enough? Of course not. Look, you're not supposed to know this, but there is a highly classified artificial intelligence satellite intelligence analysis system called Sentient. Why do we keep putting stuff like that in the script when it is so hard to say? We only know a little bit, but what we do know is pretty unsettling. It is a satellite system that can autonomously move and monitor interesting targets. It can view anything, and it autonomously determines who is interesting. So not only does it autonomously watch you, but it also is able to pick out who is worth monitoring and who isn't. And you can opt out of collection of data, but oftentimes it seems to be impossible, or they go out of their way to make it really, really hard. And that's because companies want to learn more about you. I mean, they're all out there funding lobbyist groups that lobby against legislation that would give you more consumer privacy rights. I mean, so far the United States government has passed barely any AI regulations, including AI facial recognition privacy laws. And globally, well, let's just say human rights activists are very concerned. And why shouldn't they be? Machines, data, AI, they don't have a sense of loyalty. I mean, what happens if the AI decides to turn on their creator a la Terminator? Or, more likely, it gets hacked. What would happen if a massive data leak came from ChatGPT? I mean, we already know they monitor your chat logs for quality assurance to make sure that you're not breaking any terms of service and for training purposes. And I know ChatGPT says that it has safety precautions and it anonymizes every piece of data that it receives. But if you were to talk to it and share something personal, you could still be identified inside a leak. So what would happen if all that data just leaked on the internet? Or, even scarier, what would happen if another country, say Russia, hacked something like Sentient? Or perhaps it has to be a little bit more personal. What if a massive data leak included something about you? And this isn't the future, this is the present. This is what we are presently facing. So I have to ask, was Orwell right? Sort of. But it was worse than anything he could ever have imagined. And our technology is more advanced than his writings. Governments collaborate with each other to learn more about citizens. And it's not just the governments. You might think opting out will fix your problems, but it won't. Opting out isn't an option. Being anonymous is dead. Most services exist online these days, and digital seclusion is a real problem. Especially when it comes to employment or social media or even public services. You can delete everything from the data brokers. You can remove everything and live off the grid. But you will incur social and financial costs. You really have no choice but to exist in the system, unless you want to become a digital hermit. So yes, you are being constantly tracked and monitored. But on the bright side, the government normally won't spend a mass amount of resources looking for somebody like you, or somebody like me. We're ordinary people. Tracking data is very expensive, and overuse is wasteful. Generally, unless you are a person of interest, the only people tracking you want your money. It's very likely that if Sentient is used unethically, then we will have another Snowden era type leak. And if the government is tracking you, it will probably not be like 1984. I mean, at least not in America or most other first world countries where you have rights and protections against an oppressive government. And despite what we believed when we were kids, the television is not listening to you. There is no telescreen to report you to Big Brother. You don't need to worship the government. You're allowed to speak against them. And while we do have our own personal problems, and we're still being monitored and watched by companies and corporations digitally, but as I said before, it's less likely that the government cares about you or I, and generally the police or any law enforcement has to have a warrant to come after you. So ultimately, Orwell may have been right about the constant monitoring, but the motivations behind it are more capitalistic than bureaucratic. Because we don't live in the same world, and this is not 1984. Traveler.